Hello everyone, so I want to talk today about paranormal events, and there's one that has been described to me very recently, and it was to do with some fish cakes which were bought and put on top of a freezer. And these fish cakes were put on top of a freezer, and the person concerned went into the freezer to pull something else out to get out, and found the item, pulled it out, and was just putting it exactly on top of the freezer, which is where the person put the fish cakes only moments before, and they had vanished. They were no longer there. And this is an event, this kind of event is something this person's familiar with experiencing. So she went inside and explained what had happened, and then a little while later the person living with went outside and found the fish cakes in the freezer. And so the first person said, "Oh, show me where the fish cakes are, please." And the point of the story is that the fish cakes couldn't have been simply and easily put in there by accident or a little moment of absent-mindedness, because they were stuffed behind a whole load of other things, all of which would have had to have been pulled out before these things could have put in there. So here's the point. There are many things that happen in this way. So one of the terms that can be used is poltergeist activity. So a poltergeist is the sense that there is an energy which moves things around. This can cause things to disappear and reappear. Another example is keys can disappear and reappear, sometimes even days later in a completely different location from where they are founded. So this sort of thing does happen rather more often than some people might realize. So I was given last night a completely clear explanation about why these things happen. So in the case of what I'm talking about, there's this concept of there being an energy that does this, and that's the way it's looked at. Different people have different opinions and impressions about these circumstances. So what I want to do is I want you to take you straight into Star Trek, because Star Trek has a way of talking about this which in the Star Trek universe is completely obvious. And what they talk about is they talk about something called subspace. Now, this is the way that it goes. A non-corporeal being, a being without any physical substance, would find it very easy to do things like disappear keys from one place, for there to be a period of time elapsed where the keys are nowhere to be seen, and to reappear in another place. Or for the fish cakes, which were simply put on top of the freezer while something else was pulled out. And that took less than a minute. In that very short time, they disappeared from where they'd been put. And some while later have been found in a place where they couldn't have been put there without a lot of moving around. So these things can happen because of what is called subspace. So that's what Star Trek calls it. Now, when I was tuning into this last night, I was thinking about a more of a shamanic way to look about things. The words that came up for me were words like elsewhere, and then finally the word nowhere. And this is all to explain to you what goes on. So if you are a non-corporeal being, a being of intelligence and energy with no physical body, and you want to move things around in the 3D everyday reality that we live in, it's so incredibly easy. Because what they literally do is they make use of something which connects everything up. So Star Trek talks about this as subspace. So the idea is that when there is a communication from one star system to another, from one starship to another, they may be light years apart. This communication can happen because it's what is called a subspace communication, which means the communication happens outside of regular space and time. So when I like to use the shamanic models that came up for me about elsewhere or nowhere, this is really what's going on. A being without a body can tune their consciousness into something that's happening in this realm. And what they can do, should they choose to, wish to, is they can literally create a fold in our experience of reality, and they can disappear anything they want into that fold. And because once it's inside this other space, this elsewhere, this nowhere, this subspace, this can connect to anywhere. And that's the idea of starship to Starship communication in Star Trek. They can communicate far away because once it goes into subspace, that message, it can then exit anywhere. So it's the same principle. So when the keys disappeared and appeared in a totally different location some days later, that's because when you go outside of this three-dimensional reality, you're not stuck or imprisoned with linear time anymore. You go into a space which is beyond conventional time and also beyond conventional space. So this is how the fish cakes could magically and mysteriously go from the top of the freezer to actually inside, buried behind a load of other stuff which no one had the time or energy or inclination to do. That's how it could happen. But the really important question about all this is, these things happen to some people. Why? And this is the answer. The reason why these things happen to people, and they're happening more and more, if you start researching online, you'll find there's lots of evidence of people reporting these things, is because what is happening is our old rigid understanding of third-dimensional reality is being challenged because we're in the period of awakening. So if you go back to the 1960s, the vast majority of people believed with true sincerity, if they couldn't see, hear, touch, taste or smell it, it didn't exist. So for them, ghosts, poltergeists, paranormal phenomena, auras, energy fields, none of those things existed because they couldn't actually recognize them with their own senses. But actually that shows how blinkered and blinded they were back in those days, because they all recognized love and all sorts of other qualities which you can't see, hear, touch, taste or smell. So actually it was a very illusory place they put themselves into, but we're in the time of the big awakening now. So what is happening is we're all being presented with more and more evidence that what we used to think was impossible is actually quite routine. So I want to take this to another place altogether. So I have a shaman, Brother Robert, and sometimes when he's got a client with a particularly difficult problem with a particular part of their body, this is what he does. He works with the guides. Now, working with guides is rather like this being that was moving the keys and the fish cakes around in somebody's house. It's a similar kind of deal. So what he does, he gets together and he works with his guides. Classic example, someone had some major damage to their spinal cord and it couldn't be worked upon in a conventional means. So what he did is he downloaded a new spinal cord into that person. Now, when someone hears that, the first thing they're going to be thinking of is, well, how can you do that? That makes no sense. And at first glance, looked at from a purely 3D perspective, how can a shaman download a new spine into somebody's body? It's not possible, is it? As long as you're restricted to thinking in 3 dimensions, that's correct, it's not possible. But of course, shamans are always operating outside of 3 dimensions, so this is what would have happened. Robert would have informed his guides about the person's health condition. They would have then done a scan on the person's energy body, seen what was going on. The guides would then have, in elsewhere realms, or nowhere, or subspace, whatever you want to call it, in the other realms, these guides would then have created a new spine for this person, and then together with the shaman, they would transport that spine, and it would be a purely energy construct at this point. That's the important thing to realize. They've not made a physical 3D spine because they don't need to. All they've done is created an energetic imprint or blueprint for this spine. They then transport it to where the person is lying, and the spine as an energy construct is then materialized into the person's energy field. So at this stage it's all in the realms of energy. And what would then happen is the old spine would be gradually replaced over a period of 21 days by the new spine with its full functioning. And indeed the client did report a great recovery. So this is how we can explain things like this can actually happen with shamanism, which is why it's such a powerful healing modality, because the shaman is no longer imprisoned or constrained by the idea of what is possible from the perspective of 3D consciousness. They know that we can do more than that, and in fact actually all shamans in their shamanic journey, they're accessing the realms of elsewhere. That's why a shaman can go and do a journey and arrive at the place where that client experienced trauma age 6, and they can witness a trauma, they can see everything happening because they travelled elsewhere through space and time to experience what they had to experience, and then they can bring that lost soul part and give the person the healing they require. So this is the way that it works. So this is why if a person experiences things disappearing and reappearing, this is a really great gift, because having a very powerful reminder that nothing is as it seems, and that we have far more abilities and powers than we ever realized until fairly recently. And this is one of the shamanic quotations which we like to come up with, which is as follows: human beings, we are capable of so much more than we can conceive of. So thank you very much to the person who brought this information to my awareness yesterday. And it's really interesting when these things happen that they remind us there's more to existence, and we realise we are far more than we're capable of, and shamans make use of this to do miraculous healing works, and that's how it all works. So thank you very much.